Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just about a minute. All right, Umang, I will kick things off over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cyber Insurance Playbook webinar. My name is Umang at Balbix. I'm super excited to welcome you today. And I have an awesome guest lined up here with me, Dina Mathers, who's the CISO at Carvana. You'll hear from her in just a second. But we're excited about this webinar because this is an important topic for all of security professionals that I have talked to in the past 12 months. And rather than talk to you about why cyber insurance rates are going up, what we wanted to do in this topic is provide you some actionable tips, some practical tips, some insights that Dina herself has used to lower the premiums. Of course, many of these may not be easy, but they are necessary nonetheless. So Dina, thank you for joining us. Really, really excited to hear from you. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself first?
Sure. Thank you first and foremost for having me. I'm Dina Mathers. I'm the CISO of Carvana. I've been with the company about 2 years. Prior to joining Carvana, I led the security organization at NortonLifeLock. And prior to that, I started my cybersecurity career at American Express. And when I'm not working, I'm pretty busy with 2 toddlers. I have a 4.5-year-old daughter and a 2.5-year-old son. So they keep me busy.
I would fully agree with that because I have 2 little toddlers as well, and they do keep you busy. So I don't know how you have the time to be here with us today, but we really appreciate it. So going back to this topic, to give you guys a little bit more context, we read a dozen different reports, spoke to a dozen different people, and what was pretty remarkable across all these individuals in the report we read was everyone in the industry feels very strongly that they need cyber insurance. Cyber insurance provides, especially the cyber liability insurance, provides a cushion and a protection for mainly 3 things that we heard over and over again. One is for cushion against direct financial losses that could stem from data recovery fees, forensic fees, business interruption losses, and ransom payments. The second thing that we heard loud and clear was for people that have it and people have gone through that experience, they also feel the cyber insurance companies provide them with resources, sometimes expertise to navigate the times that may happen after a breach. And they also encourage users and companies to adopt best practices. And given those sort of feedback, we felt this is important for people to know, and this is important for people to adopt. But on the other hand, we also know that premiums have been rising in the past 36 months. They've gone up every year. So to kick things off, I had a simple question for folks, which I want to share and ask and understand. How do you feel, or how do you how have you in your roles seen the cyber insurance premium change in the last 12 months? Give us some input so we also know where the sentiments lie. And that will help us tailor a little bit of the conversation. It's okay if you don't know. There's an option for that too. But this question will help us guide the conversation. In the meantime, Dina, why don't we go back to you. Tell us a little bit about Carvana as a business, and how you ended up there.
Sure. So a little bit about Carvana. So Carvana has obviously revolutionized the way that customers can buy and sell vehicles online. I joined Carvana largely because I was actually a repeat customer and thought their experience was top-notch, frictionless. I mean, in certain markets, we can actually deliver a vehicle the same day, which is really impressive. And that's largely because of the footprint that we have here on our map. So obviously we operate in the continental US. We have inspection centers located throughout the country. The inspection centers is where all of the vehicles go to get inspected and reconditioned, whether there's vehicle repairs, vehicle maintenance, maybe a vehicle needs to be repainted prior to being available online for a customer to purchase the vehicle. And then Carvana did acquire ADESA. ADESA was the second largest auction in the United States, and the acquisition of ADESA resulted in us expanding our technology footprint. And what that means from a consumer perspective is that we can deliver vehicles faster in many cases because we're closer to our customer base. And then I love, every time I introduce myself and I say I work for Carvana, almost 9 times out of 10, everybody says, oh, you know, like the vending machines. So obviously we have the iconic vending machines where customers can go and pick up their vehicle and have a one-of-a-kind experience. I mean, who would have thought that? I mean, generally speaking, when you think of vending machines, you think of snacks, not like, you know, 4,000-pound vehicle. So we do have 40 vending machines located nationwide, and we are growing that footprint. Next slide. Okay, so obviously when you think of Carvana, because of the physical locations that we have, right, with our inspection centers, our vehicle, or our auction sites, I think of Carvana though as a technology company, right? We're providing customers with the ability to buy or sell their vehicle online, either through our mobile app or our website. And because of that, we have a lot of different technology, like from a technology footprint perspective. So when I'm talking to our cyber insurance underwriters, I'm trying to communicate and articulate in the context of Carvana, what is our technology footprint? And it's very vast, as you can imagine. There's a lot of complexities in getting a vehicle delivered coast to coast. And there's a lot of technology that enables that from when the customer purchases the vehicle. We obviously have some predictive analytics about pricing the vehicle. And then once the customer purchased the vehicle, there's a lot of complexities with logistics and fulfillment and making sure the vehicle gets to our customer base. And so why security matters is because we have basically technology in every single major cloud. And as a result, we have a lot of servers, serverless, we have thousands of endpoints, we have 15,000 employees that we are required to protect. And so obviously that's why security matters. And part of the reason why a lot of companies consider purchasing cyber insurance is really twofold. Obviously, to mitigate the risk of a potential cyber incident, that has, some media extension, maybe an extortion like a ransomware attack, in some cases to mitigate the risk of data breach. But in other cases, Carvana, like many other companies, have other suppliers that contractually require us to have a minimum level of cyber insurance in order to conduct business with that third party, just like we have the same requirements on our suppliers. So, next slide.
I think what is really impressive in this, Dina, is I bought my first car 20 years back, and the experience of buying a car was took me an entire day. We went back and forth negotiating with the dealer, and part of it felt like a charade, and you're playing this game. And so I'm really impressed, and also really appreciative of how you have brought in, how Carvana has brought in technology to not only save time for people, but also make the experience so much smoother and seamless. And we have folks in the office who have bought some cars, and I think most people go through Carvana these days. So really, really awesome piece of technology that has come together. Going back to the topic of cyber insurance, again, when we looked at the data, the news, the reports, the surveys in 2024, there were some things that stood out. And Dina, feel free to chime in if you agree with this too. What we found was often when the rates go up, it's a little bit out of your control, because the insurance companies on the other side are also trying to be profitable. So when the risk of securing business or businesses go up, which somewhat gets correlated with number of ransomware or malware attacks, then the cost for everyone goes up too, or the premiums for everyone go up too. Same goes for when they have to secure more, which goes with number of sensitive data records, the claim history that an organization has, or the size of the revenue they have. Part of it is not under your control. I mean, it's how big the company gets. On one way, as a shareholder, you really benefit, but on the other side, you have to pay the bigger premium. So somewhat out of your control. But what we did find out is that for a CISO, the cost or the package or the ability to reduce the rates are fully under their control, which goes with understanding what controls you have to deploy, having better risk management strategy, a well-established IR plans, and strong security roadmap. And again, report after report had one or more of these pointers that I took away as somewhat of a summary for what you should do, what you should look at. And it was one of these 4 pillars. Tell us if you also sort of see these trends, or if you agree with how you see the rates, why they go up or down.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm looking forward to kind of sharing like practical advice about how to articulate what you have done to your cybersecurity insurance program to articulate the risk and actually, be able to negotiate better rates with your cyber insurance underwriters. But yes, it's all about risk management, right? Like the underwriters want to understand, what are they agreeing to? What security controls do you have deployed? Is it fully deployed? Is it partially deployed? And then like over time, the improvements that have been made is really key.
Yeah, awesome. Let's get into it then. One minor tip for the audience: if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A bar, and we'll get to them in between or at the end. But please put your questions in. We'll obviously want to keep it highly interactive and useful for you too. So let's go to the next slide. Let's get into the details of how you went about it, because clearly you saw that your insurance premium, as we spoke about earlier, were really high, and then a couple of years later they were lower. So just kind of walk us through your playbook on how you went about it.
Yeah, sure. So, any company that is trying to purchase cyber insurance is generally working with a broker, and then the broker works with different cyber insurance underwriters to to find out who actually wants to provide the insurance for the specific company. So as part of that process, I think we're all familiar with the different kind of questionnaires that we receive from these underwriters about our holistic information security program. The questions are very comprehensive, talking about different topics from your endpoint protection, what endpoint detection and response tool do you use, what's the coverage from your incident response plan, have you had any major incidents in the last 3 years or 5 years, to identity, how you're using multi-factor authentication, and it's very comprehensive. And that's obviously to help the underwriters understand in the context of your organization, what risk and or like what is the likelihood that you're going to file a claim, right, in the next 12 months. And so to be able to articulate that, you really should be, like, my recommendation is to create a deck that essentially talks through each one that I'll talk about, like provides context on each one of these points. So first and foremost, I think it's really important for the underwriters to understand, how are you organized from an information security perspective? So think of things like, how large is your team? How are you functionally organized? Do you have an application security function? If so, how many people are on that? What are their roles and responsibilities? Do they do threat modeling? Do they manage the bug bounty program? Do you have a security champions program? Like, just functionally, like, how are you organized? Do you have a governance function? If so, again, what are they responsible for? Your annual policy refresh, your end user training, your third-party vendor management, et cetera. I think that really kind of lays the foundation for the underwriters to understand, like, how are you, like, again, how are you organized? And if you are like a company that's leveraging third parties to kind of augment or supplement your information security program, you should probably articulate that in the slide. As an example, if you're using a managed security service provider to help with your security operations center to provide 24/7 support, you might want to articulate that also in the slide. Then next, the recommendations really help the underwriters understand what risk are they, like, accepting or evaluating when they're going to provide you with insurance. So I call it like a by the number slide. You can call it like really whatever you want. Some things that you can consider including in there is like, what is your annual revenue size? What's your customer base? In our context, how many vehicles have we sold in the last year? You might want to consider things like intellectual property. How many trademarks do you have? How many patents do you have? Maybe how many source code repositories do you have? From a technology perspective, are you in every cloud? Do you have a hybrid environment? If you're in AWS or Azure, Google Cloud, how many accounts, how many subscriptions do you have? How many databases do you have? Servers, end users, endpoints, like, just to kind of give them like a lay of the land in the context of your organization, I think is extremely helpful, because they really want to understand, like, what is your attack surface and like what are you responsible for protecting, to help kind of quantify the risks, again, that they're accepting. And you could change those numbers. Those are just some recommendations that I've used in the past to articulate kind of like the scope and the breadth of what my team is responsible for. Again, maybe with some of the more recent supplier attacks, like obviously things Snowflake, things CrowdStrike, maybe you might want to highlight how many third-party suppliers you have too on that particular slide. And then next, what I like to do is just like do a look back, like what has my team accomplished in the last year. And so ideally they would be quantifiable metrics that can articulate a trend over time. So this is where, like, I've been able to use Balbix, like breach likelihood, as a trend to show that we're trending low, like the score's going down. But there's also other services and tools that, you might have in your organization that scan your external perimeter and kind of give you a score about your cybersecurity posture. So you can include those as well to kind of help articulate in a quantifiable way how your security posture is. And then naturally, like the next thing that makes sense to include is like, what are your top initiatives? Like whether it's a top 5 or top 10, like what's your roadmap? Like what are you actively working on and prioritizing from a risk perspective, and then articulating your progress against those initiatives, I think is also like really key. Are some of these completed? Are some of them still in progress? To help articulate again the improvements that you've made over like the last 12-month period. And then the next slide, the next thing to do is to like to articulate some of the security technologies that you have, or we could say controls. And I think you could kind of visually represent this in like one of two ways. You can think of like, obviously the layers of cybersecurity. You can use like the OSI framework and like say like what controls do you have at each layer, ranging from physical all the way to application. Or you could kind of take a more like I call it like a periodic table, but like think of it like you have a visual representation of your attack surface. And then you have like, okay, users in one column, and then what security controls or technologies do you have to manage identities, to manage like your user awareness and education. What do you have from an email security perspective? And again, you can either do it from a control perspective, like we tag our external emails, like we have an email security tool that scans for malicious files or attachments, or you can say the actual tool that you have. So like, I don't think it really matters. It's just trying to help the underwriters understand all of the different controls and or technologies that you have deployed to mitigate the risk within your own organization. And then some, for those of us that are going through the renewal process, we already have pre-established relationships with our brokers and our underwriters. So during the course of this underwriter presentation, there's opportunities for them to ask you questions. And, like while every company has made improvements, right? It feels like cyber is never ending. Like we could always do more to provide a layer of protection. So in those cases, oftentimes you'll get very direct and very specific questions from your underwriters about specific controls that exist. So I don't know, just like one example might be, hey, you have a bunch of end-of-life operating systems in your network. What's the progress been? Like, what's the number now? Or maybe it's, hey, I only have multi-factor authentication on this specific use case. And then like being able to articulate that you've expanded beyond the one use case that you did when you first had the conversation. So that might not be relevant if you're not renewing, but I found that to be like incredibly valuable, because you're going back and you're saying like, I was listening to the questions that you asked. Maybe you asked me about network segmentation and how to mitigate or reduce our blast radius. And you're providing a very specific update to the underwriters about what progress have you made, and then what are your future plans to continue to drive down risk in those areas. So that's really worked for me. And like it seems to kind of put like a packaged story together about how you're articulating and manage risk for your organization and your own business context.
Couple of questions, Dina. This is
Sure.
this is all great feedback. So two questions came in. One of them was about how do you account or share the default or built-in controls that you may have for hosts for laptops and for browsers? Do you articulate that? And if you do, how deep do you go?
Yeah, so I've used two different approaches. So I've always liked the kind of like periodic table where I have like the attack surface at the top of the slide, and then users, email, servers, endpoints. And I've kind of changed the approach depending on what I've heard. In some cases, you want to articulate that you have like industry leading security products. And in other cases, you just really want to say, I have a comprehensive list of controls. So if we're talking about endpoints as an example, and we want to articulate the controls rather than the technology, you might say, hey, like by default, our users don't get local administrative privileges to their endpoint, or we have an advanced anti-malware solution, or we have endpoint, detection and response capabilities. We have a software management application that helps us ensure that our operating systems and applications are patched regularly. So that's what I've done in the past. Again, you can also take the technology approach and just say, okay, well, if my EDR, just because CrowdStrike's in the news, let's just use that. Like if my EDR is CrowdStrike, you can say, well, I have CrowdStrike deployed on my endpoints. Maybe you also have it on your servers. And then so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just your level of comfort, but I really think it helps either from a control perspective or a technology perspective, kind of showing it on one slide, just how comprehensive your security program is.
Makes sense, makes sense. And a side benefit of that, people also find all the tools that they may never have heard about in their environment because that forces them to build an inventory of all the tools.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
A second question that came in also relevant is how do you articulate it for the underwriters? Is it an assumption that they don't know much about security, and so you have to keep it simple, or would you communicate it with them just like you would communicate with your team where they have a decent understanding of security?
Yeah, I think it probably depends, but I would say that I've gotten a lot of technical questions from the underwriters that are pretty deep and not surface level. So it certainly seems like they have a depth of technical expertise. They'll ask, questions about, okay, you have multi-factor deployed, but what factors are you actually using? Are you using phishing resistant factors, or are you using SMS? So that's been my experience as they dig very deep in the weeds. And so since they understand the technology and cybersecurity, like I think it helps to kind of articulate and paint the picture. So
makes sense. Let's go to the next one and talk about some of the benefits that you may have experienced through this exercise, because looks like you did quite a bit of thinking. And by the way, you can also, if you get a chance, how did you realize that these are the things you have to do, or did it just so happen that you tried them and they worked really well?
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know that there is like a real playbook. I just kind of saw the same questions I was getting asked by the cyber insurance underwriter. So for years, like even before, I don't want to say ransomware wasn't top of mind, but it's certainly more mainstream media now, So there's always the same questions, right? It seems like you can kind of do like the question behind the question. Like oftentimes the first question that they'll ask is like, do you use Microsoft Active Directory? How many domain admins do you have? How many are service accounts? How many are users, right? Like they kind of want to understand like, what is their risk posture? Like obviously domain admins have keys to the kingdom. So you want to minimize the number of domain admins. And then, obviously it talks also about like, what is your backup? How often do you do them? Are you able to recover? Have you tested them? What controls do you have around them? Are they isolated? And that's obviously more from a recovery perspective. So if we take the case of ransomware, you get impacted with ransomware and you don't have a backup that you can restore from that hasn't been tampered with, right? You might have to consider paying a ransom, or you might just need to like rebuild the systems that were impacted. So I kind of just saw like okay, well, it seems like they're trying to get really a comprehensive landscape of your cybersecurity program. There's so many different frameworks out there, whether it's ISO, whether it's NIST, and then how do you just articulate that holistically?
Yeah, this is fantastic. This gave me a good idea. You and I should collaborate on the questions the insurance companies ask, so you could be better prepared. Because when you show up to a meeting prepared to answer these questions, then you come across more confident and more prepared in your approach to tackle not only security and insurance. And I sure think that would impress anyone on the other side. This company is prepared, and so that's a really great idea to be prepared, knowing fully well that these are common questions that everyone wants to know. And in the process, you also learn a lot about your own security posture and how you could get better. But going back to the topic at hand, so you did these things that you mentioned previously. How did that impact your outcome? And just kind of walk us through where did you see the biggest impact?
Yeah, and again, I think it's very easy for cybersecurity professionals to say, well, you need to articulate and translate the cybersecurity risk into terms that are easily understood by different audiences. But as a matter of practice, if you don't have a tool that helps you quantify the risk, it's pretty challenging to do. Like, sure, there's the FAIR model. It's, maybe manual. There's like a lot of guesswork in there. So obviously, like Balbix helps us articulate risk in terms of like dollars, like given the context, giving our technology footprint and our controls, what is not only what is the likelihood of a breach, but also how much do we think it would cost us if we were to get breached? So obviously, Balbix has helped us in that way kind of articulate risk. And what we essentially have done is like focused our time and attention, obviously, on the highest risk within our own organization, using the actionable insights within Balbix. So, being able to articulate that, okay, over a 9-month period, we reduced our breach likelihood by 40%. Like, that's a great statistic. Like, not only can I talk about what we specifically did to get there, but just quantifying that for an underwriter is like extremely valuable. And it's done out of the box. Like, I don't need to try to quantify or say like the average cost of a breach is $4 million. But we have these controls. Like, I'm not kind of doing funny math. It's just like natively built into the tool. And then when you trend it over time, like, it's also like really rewarding because, the mantra that I use to manage our security organization is security is a team sport. Like, oftentimes as security professionals, we don't have the access to go apply patches, change configurations, right? We have to partner with our server teams or our engineering teams to like mitigate risk. So being able to kind of celebrate the wins and give recognition and really be able to articulate like, the action that I just did, if I just updated Adobe as an example across all of our impacts, what did that do to our risk tolerance? Like, so that's also helped just like establish a culture internally, like kind of beyond like the benefits beyond the cyber insurance. And then the other thing, and I started my career in cybersecurity doing vulnerability management. So it's very near and dear to my heart. Although sometimes I'm kind of surprised that organizations are still continuing to use these kind of legacy vulnerability scanners, right? Because you obviously need to make sure your scanners are deployed in the right VLANs within your environment, that we have the right firewall rules, that we're scanning the right ports. And that, okay, what is the frequency of the scans? Like, oftentimes you're not going to be running vulnerability scans every day. Maybe some organizations do, but many run it once a week. And if there's a 0-day today, now I got to go initiate an ad hoc scan to figure out what is my risk within my own organization. So anyway, like, from my perspective, a lot of those legacy tools are, even though some of them do deploy agents, that check in every 4 hours and can give you some insight, it's still another tool to manage. And so what we were able to do, obviously, with BitSight is like use the appliance as well as the agents to get more real-time insights into vulnerabilities. And, you know, my team doesn't have to sit there and say, oh, well, we didn't have authentication, so now I got to rerun the scan to get a comprehensive list of vulnerabilities. So it's really allowed us to prioritize our resources and our time on risks that really exist. And then we also have resiliency, like where we can say, okay, there's a 0-day vulnerability, and with confidence, what's the impact within our organization? And I don't have to run a scan. Like I just look at the CVE and say, okay, we're not impacted. We don't actually run this software, or we have 10 instances and we're working with the teams to fix it. So that's really helped like streamline, like reduce administrative overhead, as well as just understand our, you know, our risk posture. And then obviously being able, again, to kind of go through that playbook and articulate the story around what have we done, and then obviously what are we doing to continuously improve our security posture, telling that narrative. Like I was kind of surprised by this, especially some of the ransomware attacks that were like, you know, in the news, that like our insurance premium reduced by 25%. But not only that, like because we were able to articulate our program with confidence, like we were able to double our coverage. Like that's pretty impressive considering like I never thought that it would have been possible. Like I assumed like, hey, if we're going to double our coverage, like I don't want to say we're going to double our cost, but we're certainly going to be paying more. So that was a huge win, obviously, for our team and our company, and something that we've celebrated internally. And then, you know, with Balbix, because they have visibility into all of the different assets, whether you're talking about endpoints, servers, printers, IoTs, network devices, they have visibility into the controls that we have. And so we're able to kind of calculate out of the box, what is our ROI on the security investments that we've made? And, you know, maybe we're not articulating that to our underwriters, but it's certainly something that we're articulating to our senior leadership and to our board. And, you know, again, that comes with like tool consolidation and making sure that we actually have coverage. You know, I'm sure all of you know, like, you might have different endpoint point solutions, but making sure that every single one has the appropriate security agents is pretty challenging.
Yeah, makes sense. If cyber insurance were a sport in the Olympics, you'll definitely be in the running for the top 3 spots, I think. So that you know was a great summary. And for folks who before you go out and start working with your insurance companies or start looking for new insurance policies, something to watch out for that we found based on conversations with several customers is watch out for exclusions. They are always there. It could be about prior knowledge of risks. It could be about unencrypted data. It could be about loss of internet. And there are many, many more exclusions. So make sure you ask for it and make sure you inquire, because you may have all the right intentions and take all the right steps. But if you don't know about these inclusions, and if you were impacted by any of it, the insurance companies will not cover you. So watch out for them, ask for them, and make sure you understand what they mean. Common questions you can ask to ensure that you get better understanding of exclusions. We saw 3 examples that may seem covered because ransomware attacks typically are covered, but sometimes when they are by a nation state actor, it may not be. There have been cases, so watch out for that. If a 0-day vulnerability get exploited, that's another case that you may not be covered. And understanding of security controls and providing a proof of that. These are all common questions you should ask and ensure that you are you know what your policy cover and what it doesn't cover. The other thing you should be aware of is in many businesses, cyber liability insurance also has overlapping coverage with other types of insurance. Common ones are business interruption insurance. So generally speaking, the financial losses that would occur if a business was to be interrupted. And sometimes you would be covered under cyber liability. Sometimes you'd be covered under a business interruption insurance. So understand what each of them covers. Similarly, ransomware often is covered under commercial crime insurance, but could also be covered under cyber liability insurance. So when you go and inquire, you should understand what are the different types of insurance policy your businesses have and what each of them cover. And by having that understanding, you could reduce the coverage you would need for certain areas and only focus on the ones that you would need for cyber liability. And that way, you not only save money across these other types of insurance that may offer these additional coverages as a checkbox, but then ultimately you're overpaying across the board.
Yeah, I think the only thing, sorry, that I'd quickly note too, right, is obviously, if you have a security incident that is confirmed and, you know, your general counsel or your legal team is your best friend to determine whether or not you're actually gonna need to file a cyber insurance claim. The other things that I'll just make a note of is a lot of cyber insurance companies already have outside counsel like approved, or third-party forensic providers already approved. So as part of your incident response plan, you might want to look at who is approved and make sure you already have those relationships established. So when you have an incident that requires a third-party forensic or outside counsel, it really saves time and helps accelerate your incident response activities to know who you're going to tap on the shoulder and call, especially given some of like, you know, the breach notification timeline. You know, in some cases, like for the New York Department of Financial Services, as an example, you have 72 hours to report. And so time is of the essence. So you don't want to sit there and like, okay, well, can I get this vendor or this outside counsel approved? You just like want to know who you're going to contact. And then the other thing is, as part of your cyber insurance, there's a lot of other services that are provided that, you know, like you might not think about, but you might like want to look at like what resources are available to you. So if you're creating an incident response plan from the ground up, a lot of times those cyber insurance companies have a template that you can use, you know, to kind of accelerate that. Or in some cases, they'll come in and do like a facilitated incident response tabletop exercise for you. So I would just encourage you to also look at what additional resources are available through your cyber insurance as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. This is all great tips. And just to put it all together, you mentioned how you use Balbix. If I could summarize a few things that folks have seen benefits for. Of course, we can't provide all the capabilities and all the tools and all the features you may need to be able to negotiate your insurance, but there are a few key pieces here. One of which is, you know, the way Balbix works is we give you, first of all, a very clear and comprehensive view into your attack surface. I think that was the first thing you mentioned, Dina, as well. So by providing that view on your attack surface, understanding what are the assets in your environment, what are these applications, where are these assets and applications sitting in your environment? Are they in the cloud? Are they on-prem? So building a very comprehensive view of this attack surface, and then layering on all the vulnerabilities, all the exposure, all the risks, your EOL, your cloud misconfigurations, will provide you a more comprehensive view. And so you don't have to go into different tools to just pull a report for this. So it enables you to be a little bit more effective and efficient by going to Balbix and understanding your entire attack surface that you could be exposed to, which is one of the first questions folks ask. The second step that they want to see that the insurance companies would ask is, you know, what do I do once you have the attack surface, how do you minimize it? So one of the core capabilities in Balbix is to be able to prioritize and remediate these key exposures through automated workflows. And prioritization is key. We know that in the last 4 or 5 years, the number of vulnerabilities that have been introduced in the ecosystem have quadrupled. This year, we're likely going to have 30,000 net new vulnerabilities that are going to be announced by software vendors. But the number of vulnerabilities that actually get exploited is less than 1%. And so how do you find the needle in the haystack? And Balbix takes, again, a comprehensive approach, but also a methodical approach to understand and prioritize these vulnerabilities. We look at not just severity, but also threat intelligence, security controls that are deployed that mitigate the impact of this vulnerability. We look at the business impact, and we look at the exploitability of each vulnerability to come up with an assessment on which vulnerabilities you can prioritize and you should prioritize. Once you have that, we give you workflows to make sure that you can actually fix these vulnerabilities. And once you get to a point where you are in the cadence of minimized state, where you have all the critical and high vulnerabilities mitigated, then it becomes an ongoing effort where you have the workflows and you go and burn these vulnerabilities on a regular basis. And there's much more, a much better interaction, a much positive interaction between security and IT. The third thing we help is we quantify your risk. So any given time, you can go to Balbix and say, what is my current risk? The risk can be in dollars, and that gives the person on the other side a better understanding for how much risk is in this environment. And again, part of our approach is being data-driven. So we look at the historical loss data from other companies, from government agencies, from insurance companies, from lawsuits, from published breaches, and try to make sure that when we talk about the risks, a potential risk of a breach, we're looking at the likelihood and impact. And so the likelihood comes from your risk and your impact comes from external data sources. And the final number is much closer to what you would be impacted with. And of course, you'll have some opportunity to tweak and provide your own input, but we try to automate this exercise. And last but not the least, as a reward for anybody who's putting in the time and the resources, we provide these dashboards so you could track your improvements, track how quickly you're burning these vulnerabilities, what's the impact in dollars, what is the reduction in risk across different business units, who's doing better than the other. And so you create these dashboards to improve, to understand how you're performing against your target goals. And ultimately, this is all in the spirit of reducing your insurance, other things, but also reducing your insurance. And so with that, I want to thank everyone. We have some questions, Dina, that came in. I'm going to ask that of you because these are things that you had mentioned earlier. One of the first questions was, you mentioned about controls implementation. And so the question was, how do cyber insurance providers ensure that companies have these controls implemented? Do they rely on third-party audits? How do they get assurance that these companies are compliant with what they're saying?
Yeah, great question. So based on my experience dealing with our insurance broker and underwriters, again, as part of the process to get insurance, you have to fill out extensive questionnaires, again, ranging from your endpoint protection to identity and multi-factor authentication and incident response. So they're relying on the business. Generally speaking, it's a CISO or a delegate filling out that questionnaire. And so let me just use an example. So they might say, okay, what endpoint detection and response tool are you using? Say you answer CrowdStrike or whoever, Defender, SentinelOne, you name it. And then it'll say, what is the percentage of assets that have that deployed? And so you would respond with the percentage. Or sometimes they'll say, okay, multi-factor authentication. When do you use it? Do you use it for remote access? Do you use it for privilege access? And it's kind of like a checkbox. It's not like an all or nothing. So it kind of depends on the question. So generally speaking, they're either asking you to provide coverage information for your tools, like as far as percentages, or they're saying, here's different variations, click the ones that apply. Again, like privilege access, is it every user? Is it for remote access? So it's really a self-attestation, and then based on how you're responding to those questions, in some cases, like our broker provides us with a maturity, right? So they use the cybersecurity maturity framework, and for each control, they tell us kind of where we need to focus, but we get an overall score of maturity on a scale of 1 to 5. Now, I will say it's somewhat of a black box. I'm like, like what does a 2 or a 3 mean, and how much does the premium reduce? But that helps them get an idea. And then there's also, in addition to like the technical supplemental questions, there's often like privacy questions, right? So they might say, how many personally identifiable records do you have? How many payment card records do you have, if you have any? And so that helps them, again, like they're relying on the subject matter expert within the company to respond. And then again, given some of the more recent supply chain attacks, they'll ask you like, what are your top 10 vendors? Or, what are your critical suppliers? So I haven't seen them do a third-party audit. However, I do think if your company is using a tool, I don't want to throw names, but like say a security scorecard, a BitSite, Black Kite, something that gives you a quantifiable risk for your external perimeter, like that certainly helps, especially if your score is like an A, or it's like close to a 900 if you're using BitSite. That kind of provides them with some independent validation of what you're saying. But generally speaking, it's just how do you respond and what's your maturity for each question.
Makes sense. And the second question, the last question, because we're almost out of time too, is given the evolution of AI, how do you see that impacting insurance, if at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if I actually think it's impactful, like from a cyber insurance perspective. It's really now just another threat vector. I'm assuming, hopefully when I renew our insurance later this year, there are probably going to be questions maybe around our generative AI philosophy. But I don't know, like I feel like there's a lot of hype around AI, but when I talk to industry peers, like we still need to focus on the foundation of our cybersecurity program. And like, I would hate for us to just like want to like chase the shiny object, if that makes sense. But I guess time will tell. But I'm guessing these underwriters will be updating their questionnaires to say, what LLM models do you use? Are you using a private hosted? What maybe controls do you have? Do you have any governing bodies? Is there like an AI committee, a steering committee at your company? I would expect that to happen. I haven't seen it yet, to be completely transparent. Our renewal's not due until Q4, but I wouldn't be surprised if, there were questions about that. Makes
sense. I just have one final survey question, not for you, Dina, you're free. But this webinar has been very, very insightful for me. I actually haven't had a chance to talk to you in this much detail, but really, really helpful. I would love to get this feedback form and have folks answer this question. We understand people are busy, but we really value your feedback. If you answer some of these questions for us, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we provide content, things that are helpful and useful to you. So please take a moment to answer this question. Any other last minute tips or summaries from you, Dina, while folks answer?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway, like if the one thing that you took away from this webinar is, when you have an opportunity to talk about your cybersecurity program to the underwriters, like take the time to prepare slides. Like I know oftentimes like we're all busy and like it isn't necessary, but I really think it helps tell the story about everything that your team has accomplished, and like, let's be like real. Like we all love our jobs as cybersecurity professionals, but sometimes it's thankless, right? And it's not as glamorous as sometimes it seems. And so That I would just encourage you to actually have a deck. I have seen instances or been in presentations where it's just a talk track, which is fine, but I think having the slides and being able to help articulate your points just kind of strengthens like your chances of negotiating a better rate.
Awesome. This has been very helpful. Thanks again for taking the time. Thanks to all the audience that joined us from different parts of the world. We really appreciate spending the last 55 or so minutes with you. Thanks again, Dina. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.